Get a load of this. Students are going to be banned from refusing speakers a platform at the universities. This is under the first government intervention on free speech on campus for 30 years. So this is after a growing trend of universities towards no platforming and creating safe spaces to silence certain views. How important is it to have free speech at university? Should universities be a bastion of free speech and allow a broad range of speakers?
Oh, I don't know. Look, I believe in free speech. That's all I can say. I believe in free speech. So, yes.
People are just maybe probably inclined to go and listen to people with similar or like views. I suppose you're less likely to go and listen to someone, however controversial, if they are not singing from the same hymn sheet as you, I suppose.
Yeah, but free speech is governed by certain laws and regulations as well. So you can't incite racial hatred, religious intolerance, I think, that kind of thing as well. I'm not quite sure what the whole list is, but it is guided.
As I understand it, let's first of all speak to Tom Slater. Good evening, Tom.
Good evening.
Tom is the deputy editor of what is called Spiked Online, and basically you're pro free speech, Tom, yeah?
100%, yeah.
100%. So students are now going to be banned from refusing free speech on a platform at universities. So you're obviously in favour of this.
I'm not actually,
Why?
strange as that might sound.
Why?
I think there's two things to it, really. I think, first of all, that the proposals that Sam Gima and the Office for Students have been putting forward, they're not going to really tackle the problem, insofar as the only control they have over the university space is university administrations. And the vast majority of this comes from student unions. So that's the kind of technical point. But the more sort of principal point is I don't think you can have a kind of pro-freedom crackdown, as it were. I don't think you can fine universities. I don't think you can blacklist them, as been suggested, for blacklisting other speakers. I think the problem on campus is actually a cultural one, that there are groups of students and some people within even university administrations who see freedom of speech as a kind of second-order principle that should be put below keeping students safe from offensive ideas. And it's until you tackle that culture and that climate, I think things will carry on as they are.
And Tom, could you expand on that for me? I mean, to those outside, to those who've never experienced a university environment, is this a right or a left-wing thing, or does it apply on both sides?
I think it would be fair to say that even up until a few years ago, the main speakers who would find themselves no platformed on campus, vigorously protested, tended to be of the right. But I think we can't say that anymore, actually. I think an argument that left-wing supporters of free speech like myself have always made is that you can never make concessions on free speech, because as soon as you do, it won't be long until it's affecting someone who you actually like. And we've seen that play out in the last couple of years. I mean, if you think about the big headline stories of no platforming, it's people like Jermaine Greer, there's people like Julie Bindel, kind of feminists have been swept up in this, human rights activists, even gay rights activists in some instances. And I think we can really see the logic of that point I just made bearing out when we're mentioning people like Jermaine Greer and Jacob Rees-Mogg in the same sentence. Clearly, this is sweeping up both the left and the right.
See, yeah, you sort of surprised me there, because I'm just assuming from the outside that the more radical you are, the more controversial you are, the more left-wing you are, probably, the more likely you are to be invited to a university to speak. But you think not?
I think it's just the case that it's probably fair to say that, you know, there are particularly people who run student unions would identify as being on the left. I mean, how much I tend to think that if you're not in favour of freedom of speech, then that actually questions your left credentials. But that's a kind of side point. But I guess what I'm saying is, whilst there's still clearly the case that it might most often be those on the right of politics, social conservatives, anti-abortion types, all the rest of it, who will be more likely to be picketed. I think it's gone so far now that it's sweeping up people on the left as well.
Okay, well, in the interests of free speech, I'm now going to bring in, stand back, Tom, here comes Saira Khan. Okay.
Tom, I don't understand this, because legally, if there are guidelines, so you can't just go and say anything, as long as you're not inciting hatred or causing civil disturbance, etc., then you can say what you like. So why are people I don't understand why they're not giving them a platform. As long as they are saying what they are saying within those guidelines, you know, So what's the problem?
Well, I think that's exactly the point, is that a lot of the censorship that we're seeing on campus has nothing to do with what the legal standards in relation to the law is. I mean, if, for instance, Jermaine Greer was, engaging in hate speech or something, she wouldn't be no platform, she'd be arrested.
Yes,
I mean,
yes, exactly.
Going on. But I think, leaving aside the question of where the law should be in relation to freedom of speech, which is a whole massive issue in and of itself, I think a lot of people have to recognise how low the bar for censorship on campus has become. And one example is one of my favourites is in 2014, there was a group of students at Oxford University who, in response to this trend, wanted to start a free speech magazine called No Offence. And its first issue was banned from the Freshers' Fair for causing offence. So there is. I think it's quite clear that this has gotten far beyond even what we might see as the kind of, what a lot of people at least might see as the kind of hate speech limits to speech.
Let me now just bring in Adam Elliot Cooper. Adam Elliot Cooper is a research associate at King's College London. Adam, good evening to you.
Good evening.
So I thought the whole point of university, or one of the great things about university, was to encourage free thought.
It certainly is, and I think that when we think about academics, like myself, and about the necessity to construct rigorous and well-researched arguments within academia, we certainly do have those principles. But there's something else that we have at universities as well, and those are unions. They're democratic organisations where students elect representatives to represent them and their interests. And so I guess when we think about how representative democracy works, if I, for instance, ran to be Students' Union president and I said I was going to run on a platform of anti-racism and anti-fascism and anti-xenophobia, and then somebody wanted to come and speak and was going to say things that were considered racist or xenophobic, then I would have a democratic obligation to not use Students' Union resources in order to allow that speaker to speak.
OK, got that. Kate, what have you got to say?
I just want to ask either of you, really, at what point do universities or should universities step in? Because I was at Westminster where Jihadi John went, and there is no knowledge, no fact around whether he might have been radicalised at university or whether
was he radicalised,
or was he? And there are no facts. There is no evidence of any connection to the University of Westminster, and so we should point that out. But what if, under your rules saying, look, people should be free to say whatever they like, universities should stop being overly conservative about this, at what point do they step in? Because 18-year-olds are different, right? Some are young and impressionable, some are away from home, and some are at university desperately wanting to belong. Okay. So you might perceive that perhaps they are impressionable.
Well, let's hear from Adam first of all on this one. Adam.
I'm probably with Tom on this one. I don't think that universities should have any right at all to intervene in the democratic decision-making of students' unions. I think students' unions should be autonomous, and I think they should make their own decisions about both the government or universities intervening in the decisions that they make. OK,
Tom?
No, I completely agree. And I think that the thing we always have to remember about freedom of speech is that it isn't just the freedom of some people to spread malicious, hate-filled, whether it's fascistic or Islamist rhetoric. It's also the freedom to kind of answer back. And I think if in the case of something like Westminster, the worst thing that could possibly happen if, for instance, extremist preachers were being invited onto campus where they can be challenged is for them to be pushed off campus where students can hear them with zero challenge. And that, to me, is, I think, the far greater danger here is that the thing about censorship is it just pushes things in further into the shadows where we don't know what's being said and we don't know how to argue back against it.
OK, gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed. Tom Slater, who you just heard there, the deputy editor of Spiked Online, and Adam Elliot Cooper, who's a research associate at King's College London. Coming up to 5:15.